Welcome to the official podcast of the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. In this podcast, students and early career researchers share more about their publication in the journal. Join us weekly to hear from the next generation of STEM leaders as we elevate their voices in science, technology, and innovation policy. Hello, and welcome to SciPol SoundBites, a podcast of the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. I'm Adriana Bankston, JSPG's Chief Outreach Officer and your host for this podcast. Let's dive in. JSPG recently published a special topics issue on the impacts of emerging technologies on inequality and sustainability in collaboration with the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth. Today, we're joined by an author from said issue, Stuti Chakraborty. Stuti is a gold medalist in occupational therapy, physical medicine, and rehabilitation from Christian Medical College, Vellore, India, and is currently working in a brain injury rehabilitation setup. Through her work, she advocates for young people's health with a focus on rights of persons with disabilities, and she has represented her country across various platforms, including at the Global Conference on Primary Healthcare held in Astana in 2018. Stuti is the author of a new op-ed published in JSPG entitled Assistive Technologies, Addressing the Divide Between the Developed and Developing World. Stuti, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you. So let's start with, can you give us a simple 1-minute overview of your publication?
Sure, I'd love to. So because I work in the rehabilitation profession, and I'm a rehabilitation healthcare professional. So I deal with a lot of people with disabilities that require assistive technologies in different types of assistive technologies. So just to give a brief overview of what my article addresses, what exactly an assistive technology is. It is basically something that helps a person with a disability or a differently abled person to improve their quality of life with the help of something technologically. It is something which is which can be acquired off the counter, or it can be made specially or custom made for somebody. So it can be something as simple as a wheelchair or something to wear on your hand like a splint, which can support your hand if it's not working, or just straighten out your fingers if you have a deformity in your hand. Or it can be something as high tech as an environmental control unit, or a brain computer interface, or an assistive robot that helps you do your work. So there's a range of assistive technologies, and with the emerging of technologies, there has been a significant gap which has occurred in between developed and developing countries, mainly because of the divide in terms of socioeconomic status, in terms of the accessibility to good healthcare services and rehabilitation services, as well as the stigma that is associated with being differently abled. And as the new technologies have emerged, these inequalities and gaps in terms of sustainability and in terms of achieving SDG 3 as well as the other SDGs has actually started to widen. And that is what my article talks about. And I also provide some recommendations as to how to overcome these.
Yeah, that's really important work. Thank you. It's nice to learn about what you're working on. So tell us more about what was your motivation for doing this work?
So I come from India, and in my rehabilitation setup, I see that there is a lot of socioeconomic divide in terms of the the assistive technologies that even we give to patients. So in a country like India, where there are people who are extremely rich, and then there are people who are extremely poor, there is a lot of socioeconomic divide. My college is actually extremely, my university and the hospital that I'm associated with is extremely concerned about the assistive technologies that people get. So like we have a lot of schemes, and we have like a rural development, a rural health development unit that actually tries to give a lot of assistive technologies to people for free who cannot afford it. However, that is not the case in other hospitals around the country, and only the people who can afford, differently able people who can afford, something called as as simple as a hand splint, or something as simple as a walker or a wheelchair, or a stick or a quadrupod which helps them to walk, or something as which is called as an ankle foot orthosis, which helps them to support their legs, or the muscles of their legs when they have to walk. These things are really quite expensive to procure, and not a lot of hospitals or universities or colleges or medical centers give them for free. And so patients who are really, people who are really from a lower socioeconomic status are not able to afford them. And as a result of that, it kind of sort of, heightens their disability, because they're not able to walk, or they're not able to, even if they're able to walk, they're not able to do it in the correct manner, or they are not able to get a wheelchair, which helps them to become mobile and be productive. So I have seen some patients who, who belong to a better socioeconomic status, who are able to afford these assistive technologies more, and as a result of that, their quality of life improves, only because there aren't things that are available for people who are belonging to a lower socioeconomic status. And as a reason, because of that, this kind of problem motivated me to understand, what exactly are the issues behind this, and this is an issue which really needs to be addressed. And so when I saw that this divide exists in India within every hospital or every rehabilitation setup, it made me wonder what it would be like, because I have read a lot and I have seen a lot in terms of people getting rehabilitated fully, getting back into the community and improving their quality of life, after being in a high income country where the accessibility to assistive technologies is very good. So that kind of motivated me to address this divide.
That's really interesting. So you see all these disparities as well across different parts, or different institutions also, sounds like. Yeah, that's really interesting. So I want to ask you a little bit, go more deeply into how this kind of work is done. So a lot of our audience members are students, early career researchers, or young professionals, and would be maybe interested in getting in this topic. And if you can provide some advice as to how you went about doing this kind of work for them.
So I think people who are interested in going into the rehabilitation field, or not just the rehabilitation field, but something to do with assistive technologies and engineering, there's a lot of things out there that are available right now with the development of technology. I think what most people lack understanding of is how to make technology that is sustainable, how to make technology that is accessible for all. Because at the end of the day, the aim of technology is to improve our lives, not to worsen the outcomes, especially when it comes to healthcare related technology. I think people really need to think about how technology that is important for healthcare, even if it's making a medical equipment like as simple as a ventilator, or even if it's making something like a wheelchair, I think it needs to be and a lot of people are working on this, and I'm really appreciative of the efforts of people that researchers around the world who are working on this, engineers and different stakeholders working on this. The most important thing that I think everybody needs to keep in mind is how to make things a lot more accessible, because only then is the purpose of the technology or the particular device served, and only then is it actually going to help a greater humanity. So my advice would definitely be, first, keep in mind that the things that you work on should be sustainable. And in terms of going about with the research, with people with assistive technologies and disability, so I think having a background helps, because I had a background and because I have seen the issue and I have faced the issue practically in terms of through my own work and through the engagements that I have. So it was a lot easier for me to sort of relate to and point out the issues and the problems and the gap and the loopholes. However, if people do not have a background, I think it's very important for them to understand and establish a good background. So a lot of reading kind of helps to know more in-depth knowledge about the topic. And I think because there's internet, there's connectivity, everything has become a lot more easier nowadays. So it definitely is not a challenge anymore. So if you're interested in a particular topic, I would suggest, if you're interested in a particular work, whatever it may be, think about technologies or think about things that can be sustainable first, and second, develop your knowledge and develop your background in depth into it, The more you read, the more you understand, the more you are well equipped to address problems and find out the gaps in the literature or in things that have not been done and things that you need to do.
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you. I think sometimes people start doing projects and don't think about the long-term consequences or kind of broader picture. So that's really good advice for early career researchers trying to get into this field. So for you specifically, I'm curious, what was your sort of the most exciting and the most challenging part of this work for you?
I think the most exciting was, just going through the literature and seeing how much, disparity exists. And I kind of learned a lot, and that helped me to kind of take back whatever I learned into my own situation and scenario back at the hospital, and think about, how assistive technologies are being made. So, for example, the hospital that I work in, it has a full-fledged group of professionals who are, making these kind of assistive technologies, or who have access towards, like I just mentioned to you about an ankle foot orthosis, which is a device which basically helps a person with weakness in their muscles in the leg muscles to walk and support them. So it can basically, be given to people who've had a stroke or who've had an injury, and because of that they cannot walk. So we have professionals making these things available in the hospital that I work in. However, that is not the scenario in most parts of my country, and definitely in other developing countries. So I think it's very important that people are made to be aware, and I think that's one challenge. That I perceived that people are not aware of, how to go about with understanding disability, understanding what causes disability, and understanding how to deal with and tackle disability. I really feel strongly that the disability lies in the environment, it's not in the individual. If we give an environment that is equally opportunistic and equally inclusive of people with disabilities, then nobody in this world would really perceive to be disabled. It's just how how the environment is for them. So that is definitely a challenge. And in terms of my personal work, I feel like the challenge that I faced was, just coming up with really good literature, supporting literature. And the exciting part was working with Madeline. Maddie, she was the assistant editor for our particular, issue, and she was an amazing, special editor for this particular issue. And I think she did a great job in terms of guiding me to, write the literature in a more efficient manner, which is accessible and readable to people from all different parts of academia. And so I'm really, really thankful to her for guiding me and helping me improve my scientific writing skills. So that was really exciting for me to work with her. Yeah, I think that's all.
Great, thank you. That's a really good answer. It's always interesting to hear what people's motivations are for doing this work, and you're doing a good job explaining kind of the larger picture as well. So we're sort of moving into that direction now, talking more broadly about the implications of implications of this work, more broadly in society, but also for underrepresented groups specifically. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
So I think what I mainly wanted to do and achieve through this particular publication is to bring light on this issue. I think it's quite an overlooked issue. There is a lot of literature out there about, assistive technologies per se, and the development of more assistive technologies. But I guess what I wanted to kind of bring light to various stakeholders and people in academia, people who are interested in research, people who are interested in furthering the cause of science and science policy and the implications of science in real life. I wanted to kind of draw their attention towards this particular topic and how it can be an issue that can be resolved only if we think about being sustainable and accessible in terms of the research and the work that we do. So my idea was to, provide some recommendations that can actually be done in a more feasible manner. I have given recommendations about the training and recruitment of rehabilitation professionals, of having regular, a proper centralized system of governance, which are things which are in place in certain countries. You know, they're already in existence. However, they just need to be a lot more sort of smoothened out, and you know, they need to be a lot more made a lot more accessible and understandable to people. And one of the main things is through awareness. And so that is what you know, something that I kind of wanted to achieve through this. So the recommendations that I feel I have suggested are things that can be implemented for sure. They are not something that, you know, are not completely out of the world, or not, you know, they're not feasible. I feel like I have given recommendations that can definitely be tweaked and twirled here and there, and then, you know, they can be implemented. So that was kind of like my motivation, and you know, the implications that I wanted through this piece of publication, to just in some way or the other help people with disabilities all around the world, especially people in the, you know, in the developing countries, because of the environment, like I said, that is limiting them for their growth. You know, a same person on the wheelchair in a developed country might be having a job, might be working a 9-to-5 job, might be earning a salary, but because they have the accessibility, they have the rights. You know, it's all there on paper, but not a lot of it is being implemented. And the same person in a developing country is sitting back at home, just being, you know, not being productive, and you know, ultimately increasing the societal burden, which is not the case that should be. So I think that was kind of like the implication that I wanted to get out of this publication and draw the attention towards these issues.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's very insightful and really well said, I think, in terms of the disparities that exist that we don't always think about around these issues. So thank you. One question more specifically about albiism. How can we deal with that, especially in places where disability is still stigmatized?
Right. So I think the concept of ableism is very, it is practiced in our daily lives. We just don't know about it. And, you know, the narrative around discussing disability and people with different abilities should be changed. So we should not, you know, just, you know, have a charitable approach. So there's something called as having a charitable approach towards people with disabilities, and that needs to be changed. What we need to understand is people with disabilities or differently abled people or people with special needs are not a burden for society. They can and have the right to the UN, you know, CRPD recognizes them to be treated equally, and it gives them the right to be treated, you know, to treat them equally. And they do have the right to be part of society and part of everything that is in the productive sector as much as everyone else. And so the concept of ableism kind of comes in when, you know, we treat people with disabilities as, you know, being dependent people, as being people who do not cannot do things on their own and need to be dependent on people who are able-bodied, because, you know, disability can be in many forms. It can be a physical disability, it can be because of a mental illness, it can be because of, you know, different things. So it should not restrict oneself or one person or put them into boxes, because that is again a challenge that the environment lies in. It's not the person's problem, it's the environmental problem. And by environment, I mean the social environment, I mean the productive environment, I mean the physical environment, the temporal environment, all types of environments. So we need to be a lot more inclusive, and even in terms of addressing our own selves, I think we need to change the narratives in terms of how we address people with disabilities. We need to stop addressing them as cripple-bodied people, people who have problems, people who have, you know, who cannot go by and go around by themselves. And we need to stop segregating ourselves and calling ourselves normal and calling them not normal. So I think that's the biggest narrative that needs to be changed, and that's how a stigmatization around disability can be resolved. And the other thing that people need to understand is people with disabilities need to be empowered. They need to be made self-sufficient. They need to be given employment. They need to be given equal opportunities in society. And this does not have to happen only on paper. It should actually be implemented across all levels of society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree. That's interesting, the points you're making and how we can empower them. I think that's a really important direction. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the last question, just tell us where people can find you online in terms of LinkedIn or Twitter, or what's the best platform?
So Twitter, so I'm not on Twitter, I'm sorry. So you can definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, my name is spelled in the same way as Stuti, and the surname is spelled in the same way. So just feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and drop me an email at stutibb. That's B for Bangalore, B for Bangalore, at gmail.com. And you could also connect to me through my work email, which is stuti.chakraborty@polygia.com. Maybe I could have those in the description.
Yeah, we can add those, definitely. Thank you. Great. Well, thank you for joining us. We're really happy to talk to you. And thank you to our audience today. You can find this episode and others like it on JSPG's YouTube channel and on SoundCloud. That's it for this week on SciPol SoundBites, the podcast of the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to our podcast on YouTube and SoundCloud. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at SciPol Journal.